Firstly, allow me to apologise to the other YouTuber who did something very similar. Off the top of my head, I can't remember who it was. You see, it was such a good idea for a video, I just had to do one of my own. I'm sure we all have our own annoyances, or peeves if you like to call them, and many of them we share. After you watch this video, please don't forget to tell me about yours. So welcome to my unpaid and unsponsored review of many of the watch annoyances that drive me absolutely mad. Don't you just hate those people who believe a watch has to cost thousands of pounds or dollars to be any good? They insist that if the watch isn't made in Switzerland or Germany, it's got to be rubbish. They refer to any watch produced in China as junk, but they're so stupid they don't realise that half the parts in their luxury branded watches are actually made in the country they hate. Even worse are the inverted snobs. They wouldn't dream of wearing a beautifully made San Martin watch, but they're happy to wear a Casio G-Shock that's 100mm wide and 30mm deep, and that's just to the office. Unnecessary case steps. I actually struggled to find a good example of this in my collection because over time I've sold the watches guilty of this sin. I'm not referring to watches with dome crystals because they've got a good excuse. My bugbear is with watches that have got crazy depth ratings and ridiculously chunky. For heaven's sake, nobody is going to dive down hundreds of metres with a mechanical analogue watch, so let's just have 200-metre rated watches that are more than capable of doing anything anybody wants to do with them. This Axios isn't a great example because it's actually less than 14mm. However, if it was 200m water resistant rather than 500, perhaps it could have been 12mm deep. Do you see what I mean? Misaligned bezels on dive watches. Again, I struggle to show you a good example of this because I've either sorted the issue or sold the watch on. The SKX I hold in front of you just happens to be one of the few bezels Seiko have ever put on a watch that actually lines up. Perhaps that's more luck than judgment though. Okay, I realise that the purpose of a bezel is to time a dive, and being 0.3 of a second out of alignment isn't the difference between life and death. But a watch is as much a piece of jewellery as it is a device to tell the time. I once owned an £850 Devosa that had this problem. Fortunately, I sorted it myself. But how did a watch costing that much ever leave the factory, I ask you? Next up, YouTube unboxings. Now I sincerely apologise to any of my colleagues in the watch community that do these, or indeed people who enjoy watching them, but sorry, I just don't get it. To me, it's like being given my starters and then told I've got to wait a week until I can have my main course. I clicked on the video so I could learn about the watch, not how to unwrap a bloody box. Please, 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 just do it in one hit. Ignoring lug to lug and poor case shapes. There are few things in life better than glancing down at the back of your wrist and seeing your watch fitting perfectly flush. The perfect lug to lug for a 40mm watch is about 46mm, perhaps a little bit more, so why make a 40mm watch with lugs that hang over the sides of your wrist? It's just daft. What's more stupid is making a watch with a decent lug to lug width, then putting a bracelet with protruding end links on it at 6mm wider. The Steinhardt that I'm holding in my hands is 39mm, and it's a truly wonderful watch, but the case is almost flat. Now some people do have very flat wrists, but even those people can comfortably wear a well-shaped watch. In my opinion, making flat cases is just lazy, and the companies that do that should be tried by the International Court of Human Rights. Don't you just hate stupid lug widths? This beautiful Yema Fly graph, as well as my Yema Navy graph, have got 19mm lug widths. It's not just the French that are guilty of this. Tissot and Satina quite often do the same thing. Surely they don't think that by making in between size straps, we will be forced to return to them when our present straps and bracelets wear out. At 100% of the time, if they just added 1mm to the width of the lug, it would look equally as good and quite often better. In turn, that means we would have an endless amount of straps to choose from, rather than the few we can just get our hands on. 4 Chinese branded names. The San Martin I hold in my hand is a wonderful watch, and like many Chinese branded watches, it's very well made. To be honest, San Martin isn't that bad a name, but in my opinion it sounds more like a brand of fruit juice than it does a watch. However, it's so much better than Felida, Iron Watch, Bernie, or even Pagani, who decided to name their watches after expensive cars. Surely these companies could just invest a few quid in a Western based marketing company so they could come up with a few decent names. If they don't want to do that, just pick up a German dictionary and choose a word. After all, if it's got a Germanic name, it's got to be good, hasn't it? My poor old SKX is getting a right pounding today. Poorly regulated watches. Seriously, I'm not nearly as anal as some watch collectors. Now, I've been on forums where certain enthusiasts won't entertain wearing a mechanical watch if it loses or gains more than a second a day. From a personal standpoint, I'm happy with +10 -5 seconds a day, and it's got to have a beat error of about 0.5 or less. I don't consider that too much to ask, really. After all, a watch's sole purpose in life is to tell you the time, and if you have to manually move the hands every few days, it isn't really fit for purpose, is it? This SKX was running at +45 seconds a day when I first got it. I had two choices: to keep the ISO rating and put up with a watch that struggles to know the difference between daylight and dark, or lose the ISO rating, take the back off and regulate it. As I decided I was never to dive down to great depths, the back came off, and 5 minutes later it was being sensible. Surely it isn't asking too much for watch manufacturers to send us watches that actually tell us the time. Okay, this is the last one. Non-watch people who think all dive watches look like a Rolex. I really don't believe I'm the only person this happens to. I can't tell you the amount of times I've worn a dive watch and been accused of wearing a fake Rolex, when in actual fact the watch in question doesn't look anything like the watch they're referring to. This RLG is a great example of this. Yes, it does have a diver's bezel when it tells the time, but that's where the similarity ends as far as I'm concerned. The bracelet is completely different, the indices bear no resemblance, and all in all it looks as much like a Rolex as it does a cheese and ham sandwich. Perhaps I'm being a little bit intolerant of non-watch people, but I'm quite old now and being grumpy is one of the few pleasures I have in life. So that brings me to the end of this little rant, but I'm sure you can add to it as well, so make sure you leave your annoyances in the comments section below. If you've enjoyed this video, please click on the like button, consider subscribing and enjoy the rest of your day.